We're building a new prototype tool called Linda, which essentially taps directly into your data warehouse as a company and gives you answers in real time. So you can ask for what my KPI sales year to date, or what my milk sales for Constantia for this store in the last week, depending on your access levels. But you're using that reasoning engine and that large language model to build up actual SQL queries that essentially gives you real-time data.
Amazing.
That's great for meetings, Bobby. You don't have to do any prep. Just ask it on the side.
Welcome everyone to How Would You Build It? We've reached episode 25, Renier. Quarter of a century. How are you feeling? How are you doing?
Yes, good. I didn't know we're on track to hit 100 soon, Bobby. So yeah, excited to be here.
Yeah. What? The show must go on, eh? 25 and going. And very excited because we've got Catherine from 2050 joining us today. So Catherine, thank you so much for being our 25th episode. How are you doing?
Exciting. Yeah, thanks. What a nice milestone.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to just disclose that you disclose that you're a bit of a fan woman of the newsletter, and yeah, so we're going to feature you guys there, and we're going to be chatting about your story, about how you've been a founder in the space in Cape Town, in the tech space, for also a good couple of years now. You've had a few businesses and exits. And then we're going to dive into the AI conversation, where I might have to take a bit of a backseat because I know that between you and Renier, you're probably going to geek out a bit on me. So, but I'm sure the audience will love that. But Catherine, if you want to just start us off by giving us a background into your journey as a founder.
Yeah, for sure. So firstly, thank you so much for having me. How did I get here? I might be giving my age away. This is 20 plus years in the making. I started my very first business while I was still at varsity. And from there, eventually sold it to my co-founder. It was called Mango OMC. And we did full through the line communications and worked with great guys like Red Bull and Rocking the Daisies and a bunch of others. Really fun stuff. Also a lot of the Naspers group companies. And then I joined a mid-year and Google-funded startup called Boza, which was building basically a marketplace for localized content. So musicians, filmmakers, poets, right across Africa. This is pre-YouTube. Well, really when YouTube was unattainable and data was too expensive. And then I learned a lot there just around product development and partnerships. And I left to go on sabbatical, and I came back going, everyone wants to do business in Africa. How do we help them do that? So managed to do some consulting for Mozilla Firefox and again for the Naspers group, just helping them connect into Nigeria and Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa. And I loved it. I spent a lot of time in Lagos and weird and wonderful places. My parents were mostly afraid for my life, and it was all unnecessary. So that was awesome. And then, but I still really in the back of my mind had this idea that there would be scope to build a platform as a service for niche music streaming services. So in the same way that video services are starting to segment into kids and, different genres of video. I thought the same would happen around music. That trend is still continuing. But yeah, we built the first platform as a service. And the very first streaming service we built on top of that was called Licky, which was an Afrikaans music streaming service. And we had big visions to do Nigerian gospel and EDM and a bunch of others. But it turns out running a music startup in Africa as a single female founder is a pretty tough position to be in. We have some amazing angel investors, Naspers invested. And then essentially when we put Nistream to bed, my co-founder and I, who is the CTO for basically for Nistream, we started a cloud innovation unit for a local software company. And then we were like, hey, we really want to build out a company that builds on effort and not on times and material, and we want to solve cool problems. So if you ask me what I do now, I wrangle smartish humans to build cool shit. Am I allowed to swear?
Yeah, go for it.
And we're essentially a software development company that focuses on serverless and on human-centered design. So we do a lot of service design and a lot of AI-powered solutions. So we like to think that we're building products that shape our collective future. And we love what we do. I'm very fortunate to solve some really cool problems. We work with the 3 largest retailers on the African continent. We've done work with Old Mutual, for Vodacom, a few others. So yeah, we love what we do.
That's awesome.
Catherine, I've got a question about niche stream, right? So I think a week or two ago we had the story in the newsletter where we spoke about like the global players like Airbnb and you know Amazon's actual e-commerce store and going they can scale globally but they can't really be relevant to the local market, and we used Lückhoff as an example, putting the fight to Airbnb, and actually a lot of people voting in the poll, most don't use Airbnb, and actually a lot of them uses Lückhoff, which was quite interesting.
I
Now,
saw that. Yeah.
Licky is a very similar thing, right? You've got Spotify, and you've got Apple Music globally. Is there a space? Do you think for Licky? Maybe your timing was off. Do you think there's an opportunity for someone to take that on and do a
I do.
Lückhoff in the music space?
Yeah,
Lekker
I
Licky.
really do. I sit on the board for a music and tech conference called California. And so here I am. We started Niche Stream in 2015. And at the time, like very few of the streaming services were around. The Clique had just failed. Like Samsung tried to launch the Clique, really struggled with it. And in comes me with like this harebrained idea, and everyone's like, "You're nuts, literally nuts." And I was like, "Well, Afrikaans music at the time made up 48% of domestic music sales."
Sure.
So I've used this analogy a lot, but if you are an Afrikaans artist, at the time they would group all Afrikaans music on Spotify as like one thing. So it's like putting Red Hot Chili Peppers and Britney Spears on the same playlist because they sing English. And yet, like the payment methods there are very tricky, because if you're Kurt Darren, who's doing particularly well in your local market, at a volume of streams being played in a bigger pool like Spotify, you're just not getting the same money out. So why would you do it? So we went ahead and kind of cut deals with Sony and Universal and Gallo and the Orchard. Like, did 36 drafts of a contract with Sony. I moved dinosaurs 2 centimeters to the left. But the truth is that streaming services, if you, especially in very new markets like these, or any kind of localized service, people weren't used to credit card payments. They weren't used to this idea that like if you paid, you didn't actually own the content. It didn't matter that it cost like the equivalent of 2 cups of coffee. But what's interesting is I was just in Belgium, and this idea around localized streaming services is still on the agenda. Everybody's still talking about it, and yet you do realize how deep your pockets have to be to make it happen. I think now the labels especially would be more interested, but there are like, think of the Nigerian gospel market, right? There are hundreds of millions of people in Nigeria, and a very large percentage of them almost exclusively listen to Nigerian gospel music. You can work through the churches, through communities. I mean, there's such scope to do that. And in my opinion, music and culture are so intrinsically linked that I love Spotify, I use it, but it still gets my Discover Weekly wrong, because like it is very hard to pinpoint my music taste. So I think like there are localized services out there, and the fight I always had is niche is not small. It's just particular, right? It's really about bringing it down to contextually what matters to the community. So
And,
yeah, I
and,
think
and
there's still scope.
well, I think the timing was wrong, because also if you think about like Netflix and the like the expansion plan is really about localized content, right? They're making a lot of South African stuff. I mean, Money Heist is another example. It was actually a localized production that ended up becoming translated into English, but
Yeah.
it started as local content. And I think there's something to say for
The
that.
engagement's really high.
Yeah.
Sorry
So
to
I think
interrupt you. The
someone
engagement's really
might
high.
grab this and build Licky 2.0. Cut Kath in, she'll help
We
you
still
build
have
it.
the IP. Anyone's interested in buying the IP, let me know.
Fast
Yeah,
track the
so
journey.
I mean, this is 2015, 2016. We had 86 minutes of listening time per day on average.
Sure.
And I think we had in excess of 20,000, 20, and I need to go back to the numbers, but users. It's just like the drop off was really high when it got to the commitment of actually paying.
Yeah.
And then we could see every time we had an ad on KiteNet through the roof. But like ads on KiteNet cost money, a lot of money.
Yeah.
So
You have to
Exactly.
keep feeding that thing to make it sticky.
I was I was on a number of projects, or a project that got me down a rabbit hole, and I don't know where your view is on the blockchain and NFTs and music, but like once I was put
yeah,
on the project, I was like just overwhelmed with what was happening in the space. Everyone was trying to, we called it a land grab. Everyone was trying to land grab and like trying to, take the power away from the Spotifys and whatnot and give it back to the artists and stuff like that. So do you have any insights from that point of view? Did you look into that whole space, and any insights?
way too early at the time, but I'm aware of someone right now who's doing that to really look at how you can build out wallets and then you essentially allocate a currency to that wallet based on listening, based on engagement, and so forth. So watch the space. I'm very excited about what they're doing, and actually I'm trying to convince them they should white label it, because this is something a lot of the bigger streaming services could definitely use.
Yeah. I was scanning the German market, and that's where I saw all of it. There were so many different companies that were trying to do the same thing. So I'm also interested. I'd also, if that's a timing thing, I don't know, but yeah, I'm very interested to see, because I do think that there's a use case there. It's just like, who's going to be the Spotify, or how do you transition? How do you get people off Spotify? Like, how do you get people behaviors changed?
I mean, I think the behavior's changed, but so there are a lot of artists that want to support. Beg your pardon, there are a lot of supporters of artists who want to support the artists, right? So they essentially want to make sure that their artists are getting money in the right place. We were looking at a lot of merch and whether we could get people to do donations and so forth. There's a big factor there too, which is the ranking algorithms really don't play in your favor. We actually took the Google ranking algorithm, which is mostly available, but their secret source is closed out. We built out our own secret source, because if you put an artist into the top number one spot on a playlist, then that artist that song is constantly being listened to. But what's not happening is people aren't necessarily breaking out, listening to the rest of their album or any of the other albums. So they stay popular by virtue of the fact that they're on a popular list, not because they're actually popular. And so we changed the ranking and got the labels to accept it without them even realizing that actually the ranking is less about how many plays are there on one particular track, but how deep and wide is the engagement. And therefore, I think if you can build out a blockchain model that essentially tracks that engagement and allows people to get paid based on worth, then I think you've
I like that a lot. That was definitely a use case that we were exploring. I like that a lot.
But I mean,
I've got people for you to speak to.
the real value here, which I think a lot of people underestimate, is the distribution, right? So in the olden days, it was the labels that had the ability to make these CDs and ship it everywhere and get it sold in stores. And today's the streaming services. So it's so hard to get in there. And a lot of people, while they complain about the amount of money that these distribution channels make, it's really tough to build that and to stay relevant in that space. So I think in there lies the challenge and the opportunity. It's the distribution.
Yeah, and think of this. So we're doing it, or I'm leading a panel for Fast Forward in London in September, and it's all about the impact of generative AI on the creative economy. So think now, if I go back a couple of years and we're at Boza and these kids are putting up green sheets in their shacks just so they can create green screens, right? Now you've got Mid-Journey. You've got tools that allow you to not only write lyrics, think of ChatGPT, but also record those lyrics, adapt them, sync them, etc. And imagine just this power of content, of the democratization essentially of people being able to create more content, whether that's video content or music content. How do you start? So MIT had an article on this the other day, using blockchain as a way to create more transparency around what is AI generated and what's not. So watermarking is there. You might be familiar with Custos. There are companies out there, but it's not necessarily as reliable. And I think there's something there about how do you track the authenticity of content moving forward and allow people to get paid based on what they created and what's actually real. So it's a super interesting space.
It's fascinating, and I mean, it's shaking up the space. And I think something that I think is quite interesting, Catherine, is we're probably going to see a comeback of theater in a way, like live production of actual humans doing things. I believe it's going to make a massive comeback, because now, I mean, if you think about TV really brought the convenience factor of theater to your home, right? So, and that was great, and obviously added some other things, and theater kind of took a knock to that, because we're you're comparing something that's maybe not as great as theater, but it's almost as good, it's in your living room, you don't have to go out, it's much cheaper. But now all of a sudden we're going, well, if computers are generating all of this stuff, if I want the real thing, only way to guarantee it is to go out and watch a human do it in real life. So I think we're going to see a resurgence of live performance and live acting unlike ever before.
Are we going back to theaters killed the video star? I mean, I'm just not sure what the song was.
Theater killed the AI star.
Full circle, it seems. Look, it's going to be a niche, right? So I don't think it's going to be massive, but I think a lot of people would love that and pay a lot of money to to see real acting again. Because and I see these
I'm
protests
a
of,
huge supporter of corporate.
yeah, and
You
I
should
see these
absolutely go down there. I mean, like, experience.
yeah, and all of these actors are protesting, about the use of. I mean, I'm sorry, inevitably this is going to play a role in the future of this stuff. I don't think they're going to keep it out of it. Like we're going to see movies in the
Yeah.
next 5 years that are completely produced with AI. I'm convinced of that. So it's
No,
coming.
So let me
absolutely.
ask you this: if the entertainment value is the same? I mean, yes, dystopian future, people are losing their jobs. If we can just set that aside for a second, is your experience of a movie created by AI versus a movie created by humans different? And therefore,
Well,
what is it that you're after when you're watching a Netflix series versus going to Corporate Theatre, for example?
I don't know. It's hard to say, but what I
Energy.
can say is I think it's when it comes to AI writing. I mean, everybody's used GPT, right? So if you get GPT-4 to write something for you, it's good, but it's like a B minus level, right? It's not brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's good enough to get you a good grade, but you're not going to wow anyone with it, right? So, and I think perhaps the same will apply to movies. Like the main, and inevitably, the thing it might do is maybe it just lifts the bar of the quality of the authentic things that come out. Because I really feel that's what GPT-4 has done. Like writing as a general base. I mean, look at Grammarly, right? No one should be making
Yep.
grammar mistakes or spelling mistakes in writing anymore. Like, and if you do, you need Grammarly. But um, so when Grammarly came,
Do
it's
not ever
really
read an
lifted the
email of
bar of
mine,
how we
please.
write. Right? So,
Yeah,
so,
for
so
sure.
now you're thinking like the lowest entry base is now almost AI generated. Like, and then everything above that, is human generated. And I think I don't know. I'm definitely not an expert when it comes to these things, but I think humans will always just be slightly better than AI for some time to come still, and it will be interesting to see if it will actually ever get to a place where it can be creative in and of itself, which is obviously the big challenge for most AI models trying to get there. But it feels like it's always hitting like the 70% mark of what humans can already do.
Agreed. Although I unfortunately won't be able to give you the stat right now, and I can come back to you with it. But there was a study recently released by one of the major universities. I read about it on Sunday, where the models could generate more ideas faster in a shorter space of time. So that's where I start liking this idea of collective intelligence, of how do you use that to then spark ideas that humans can take further. So if you look at
Yeah.
the MIT Ideator, fantastic tool, like there's so many of them out there, where essentially it can spit out 5,000 names for a new tool you're trying to build, but you get to choose which one that is, or combine them and so forth. So
Yeah,
I don't
exactly.
know. I think
Collective
there's a lot of
intelligence.
potential there. Coming back to that experience, the one thing I don't think we're ever going to be able to replace, and it's an Afrikaans word, samesign, it's that being togetherness, right? And I think that
Exactly.
more and more humans are going to seek out that togetherness. And
Exactly.
maybe perhaps by using AI tools and harnessing collective intelligence, we can spend more time being together rather than doing menial
Absolutely.
tasks.
I do like that. I do like that.
I'm okay with universal basic income.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's been a topic on our podcast in the past. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we transitioned into AI without even trying. So clearly, like I said, we've got two AI geeks on the call. So, but that's great. So Catherine, just to finish off, kind of, from your background, like I said before we started the recording, getting to learn and understand long language models, to understand blockchain, to understand all these technical things, serverless APIs and all of that. What has it been like for you as a founder in the space? Being non-technical and being able to make a success out of it, because I think a lot of people struggle. They see it as a block, and they go and source somebody to go help them, and go to India or whatever it is, just to kind of help get that technical knowledge, because we are suffocated for it here in this country, on this continent. So just what's your kind of advice for non-technical founders, the like?
I guess advice point number one is don't get stuck on Mount Stupid. If anyone's ever seen that graph, with this idea that you think you just know enough, and that's where you get stuck, and then you really kind of go down, and then you go up on the next side. I think my strategy has always been, work with people smarter than you and stick to what you know well.
Mm.
I do obviously, because I'm curious by nature, I do my level best to understand the tools and the frameworks that we work with, but I'm not technical. I don't code. And here I am wrangling like a really large team of extremely smart engineers and data scientists. And I'm very, very fortunate that I have a technical co-founder, one of the best. And I think my strategy has always been when I'm having a fat dog with a frisbee moment, it just goes right over your head and you can't jump high enough, just tell people you don't understand. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges founders have, especially, I would say, not to grossly generalize, but I think female founders in particular, it's like hard to say we don't know, right? Because you're expected to be more than. And so in my case, I've just always kind of been open to saying I don't know, but I'll find out. And then putting in the hard work to try and understand it. No one's asking you to do heart surgery, but you can at least go and read up on what heart surgery entails and, what the methods are and so forth. And yeah, I think it's just about vulnerability and a real sense of curiosity. Like, and it's just, I know enough to know I know nothing. I always want to know more. And having smart people around you.
Yeah.
It's worked for me thus far. So we'll see.
But I think those two things, I mean, you can't, the only way that you'll admit that there are smarter people than you in a room is by being curious and understanding that you don't know everything. So, you can't really do the one without the other. If you think you're really smart, reality is you won't think other people are smart and then you won't learn. So I think it really starts with admitting that you don't know everything, and that's okay. So I love that thought. I've often seen founders actually play on either one of those spectrums. Either they know it alls or they know nothing and then they completely back out. But that middle ground of going, I don't know, but I'm going to figure it out is probably the right way to do it. So I love that thinking.
Yeah. I've realized I recently met a chap by the name of Adeo Resi, and he's the founder of Founders Fund and started Life on Mars with Elon Musk. They were roommates. I've got my story straight. And it is insane to listen to people talk. They have the craziest ideas and they just absolutely 100% convinced that they will execute. Not only they're convinced, they do execute. So I think there's this thing about having wild and brave enough ideas and being brave enough to execute. And then I think also having the tenacity, like there's that, we always talk about like what could founders do better? What are the things you can learn? I think there's grit. I know it, Ben. Like just keep on keeping on. And the art of storytelling. You've got to convince your investors, your team, your customers, yourself, your family. Like you've got to convince people that this is possible. And I think those two skills for any founder is super important. And those are not skills you learned at a university or from someone else. That's just pure, like, figure it out. I think what the one thing we underestimate is we seem to think that, like, we have to know everything to be able to do something. I knew absolutely nothing about the music world when I started. Like, I was married to a rock and roller at one point. I worked with music festivals, like, ends there, right? Been to every great music festival out there, but I didn't know what it took to build a platform, figure out label and licensing agreements, anything about raising capital or investors. I ended up with a investor list called the Mortal Kombat investor list because I tracked every single investment in music and entertainment across the US, Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. I looked at funds of funds, who'd reinvested, why they invested into those companies repeatedly, who failed. I mean, it's a thing of beauty. And it's just about going deep and being prepared to put in the work to figure it out.
Yeah.
So on that going deep and figuring out, Catherine, I mean, a lot of the stuff you worked on, some were more successful than others. Some of them didn't work at all. And a lot of times founders are like scared of just trying because they think things aren't going to work. You sitting on the other side of some things that worked, some exits, some didn't, looking back, like, how would you encourage someone to just go for it? And if it fails, like, what did you learn from some of the stuff that failed?
The best way to have lots of ideas. I don't know if founding a business is for everybody. I think it's this dream everybody has, but I don't necessarily think everyone's cut out to do it. I have a take on this. So if you speak to people in Silicon Valley, for example, like running a startup is a luxury. Like these guys get to drop out of college, to be the dropout and start a company. In a country like ours, it's a necessity. Most people have to start their own businesses because there's no other job opportunities. So, I don't think we recognize there's this status attached to having a tech startup. Like, what about the mama that runs the spaza shop or
Yeah.
the kid that's like selling Snoopy at school? Like, these are all entrepreneurs for me. And I think the failures are there because, firstly, I think it's important to share them so you can stand on the shoulders of giants. And that's a gross generalization, not calling myself a giant. I'm merely saying, like, what can other people learn from what's been out there? For example, no one ever told me what it took to shut a business down. You know that you have to have money to shut a business down? They're like
Sometimes
legal
it costs
fees,
more to shut it
fiduciary.
down to keep it going.
And you're sitting there going, hold on, like, now I need to figure. No, tons of startup guides on how to found a company, right? Shutting
How
it
do you,
down,
how do you
sorry,
get
you're
out
on
of
your
it?
own. Like, so there are lots of those considerations. And I think, what would I say to encourage people? I think you really, really, really have to believe in what you're doing. Or you have
Yeah.
to really understand that you're not cut out to work for someone. It's one of the two.
And I mean, the failures serve you well, right? And
Yeah,
then you
that's
learn from
interesting.
that and it sets you up for the next season.
There's a Leonard Cohen quote, and I hope I don't ruin it, but he basically says the cracks are where the light comes in.
Yes.
And so I think that you've got to crack a few times. Like the people who are just, I almost don't trust the guys that are like immediately successful. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
something, you learn something along the way. Like even if they're micro failures, doesn't have to be a spectacular failure. Like
Yeah.
just having great shareholder agreements. I know guys that sold their company for 1 million. They had issues with their shareholder agreements. It tripped them up.
Oh
They
my
had to spend
gosh.
a lot of money fixing that up.
Oh
So,
my gosh.
there are little things like that trip you up where you lose money or face. Um, I don't know, what do you define as failure? Or is it just fail and then evolve from there?
Yeah.
I think what we had Villani from Loop on our podcast a while back, and the topic of going to work for a startup came up, which I quite liked. And I think when you talk about people that maybe aren't cut out to start a business, go find a 2050, right? Go work and get those wings and go understand what it's like working in the environment. See if you're cut out for it before you kind of go for it. And I think that also stands out in this kind of topic of conversation.
I learned a heck of a lot at Boza. I mean, I'd been running a company, Mango MC, but then I joined Boza and I suddenly got to work with guys that had been product managers at MIH at the time, some extraordinary developers, people who really knew content inside and out. And I was just like SpongeBob SquarePants. And all
I
that
like that.
knowledge. Like, okay, cool. What else can I learn? So it's a treat. Like life's a treat if you get to learn new stuff all the time.
Yeah. Okay, so let's dive into AI because I think I diverted the conversation and I'm depriving you guys, and I don't want to run out of time. So, Catherine, you spoke about the help me here, existentialism of AI. Do we even need it?
Ooh. Well, I've been thinking about doing a talk on the NPC's Guide to Surviving AI Existentialism because A, I think we're all NPCs, and B, I think we're all just we're doomed. No, I'm kidding. With AI, absolutely. Absolutely. I think the genie's out of the box. I don't think there's anywhere to go. I think it's there's a lot of doom and gloom, and there are a lot of people who are legitimately afraid, and rightfully so. If there's something that we don't understand, it freaks us out. If I'm not mistaken, one of the first writers' strikes in the US was because of the Xerox machine. Everyone was really worried about the
No
Xerox
way.
machine. So, it's reframed something like the calculator, versus the abacus. So I think that there's always going to be fear, especially if people see that their jobs are threatened. When we started 2050, we were toying with the idea of putting an ethics board together. So, have someone who comes at it from an HR angle and from a legal angle and make sure that like any idea that we look at implementing actually is considered from all angles and what the impact of that would be. We are doing that to a large extent. It all depends on clients' appetite for doing so, but we do that. And I think that if we can consider how distributed networks, but like we've spoken about collective intelligence, I think, slightly here and definitely pre-recording. But this idea that you can tap into a much larger network, and now you can kind of use augmented collective intelligence and bring in machines to work with you to do that. If you consider AlphaFold and what we're able to do with protein folding and the types of diseases we can start curing. I mean, there's just, everyone gets very stuck in large language models, and for good reason. If you listen to the latest kind of presentation that the CEO of Microsoft did, you have this language layer on top, which essentially we can engage with. So think of the interface prior to this being the keyboard and the mouse, and then, the OS moving forward. But now we've got this language model that essentially understands intent and can interpret what we're saying on top of a reasoning engine, which is AI, on top of your data. So instead of having to know how to ask that data a particular question using SQL queries, for example, you can use language. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing.
If you think of how search could change, instead of having to understand every single keyword you want to search for, I've now seen demos from retailers and from retail startups that essentially say, okay, well, I'm going to an Aladdin party. And it essentially starts giving you recommendations on what you can wear: eyeshadow, oriental smelling perfume, palazzo pants, or whatever those pants are called, hair accessories. So you no longer have to think of every part of the outfit you want to wear. You can simply give it an example of what you're trying to do, and it will recommend what you should be considering for that scenario. So that keyword box is essentially going to become a prompt box. I mean, those are just a couple of examples of how I think this is going to make life better for everybody. And that is not under false illusions that jobs will be impacted. But, there's some extraordinary claims made about AI, and I think it also should come with extraordinary evidence. Right now, I think much more of that time should be considered or put into figuring out what the frameworks are. So even though something like the EU AI Act is not in play yet, as a company, as a startup, as an investor, what are you doing to make sure that your data is being trained properly, is clean, doesn't have bias built into it, etc.? Like, there's so many steps we can take as individuals and organizations to be on the right side of wherever this lands. So you can see I'm a bit wax lyrical about this topic.
Yeah. One of my fears, and Renier, again, I can't remember if it was before we clicked on record, but one of the things that you said, Renier, was that it's actually so easy to see if somebody's used AI, ChatGPT specifically for, producing some form of content for something. It's got a formula, it's a B- or whatever. Now, I've seen how people are using it. They're using it to create content on LinkedIn. You can see that it's purely GPT. Do they even know what they're writing? Do they even understand what they're learning? That's one of my fears. It's like, we're just going to ask the AI for, information and then spit it out. Is the person even learning what they're actually prompting? Is one of the things that I'm like questioning.
Well, I think it's the funny thing is, like, some of these posts, and it's not a lot of them, but like on LinkedIn, you can see a post and it looks like I've seen that before in my GPT chat. Or that style, just the two emojis. I'm like, this person never used emojis before. Like, what's happening here? And the reality is, I think, without noticing it, we become like BS detectors, right? We can see this. Like, it doesn't stroke with how I see. Let's say, Bobby, I read a post that you make. I'm like, Bobby doesn't normally post this way. Like, what's happening? So without noticing, we kind of pick up on these little clues, right? And I'll just be less interested in what you're writing, because this isn't authentic. We've got these amazing detectors to pick up authenticity. Now, I'm not saying we're immune to being tricked by AI, but I've just found that we're really good at that. Okay, so if someone keeps doing that, the reality is I don't think it's going to serve them well in the long term, both from how people would perceive them, firstly, and secondly, actually they're just spurring out things that I can get on GPT myself. Like, I can ask GPT that and they can tell me that, right? So I think the creators of the future, specifically think about like Twitter threads and or X longer posts, let's not say Twitter threads, because Twitter doesn't exist and threads is app by Meta. So, but if we talk about that moves fast. If we talk about people sharing interesting things or learnings on these platforms, it's quickly going to become, if it's not really authentic and useful and sincere, we're just going to reject it. So it's not going to be successful. So those things won't filter to the top. So in that sense, I'm not too worried about it. And this concept of collective intelligence is great because all of those amazing tweets that people wrote years ago are fed into these systems, and I can just go, tell me how to do this, and it actually pulls from all of that data, and I've got it right in front of me. So I think it's going to lift the bar on the quality of content that people generate. Like if my generic whatever I learned building my startup is similar to what I can find in GPT-4, I won't get any engagement on that. So what's going to happen? Like, if I really want to share, now I have to dig deep. Now I have to go, okay, cool. What is the real thing I learned here? And I need to share that thing in order for, to get noticed or whatever people's objectives are on these platforms. And that's something that excites me. So, once again, losing of jobs aside, I think it's going to push human thinking to a new level. We're going to have to go deeper. We're going to have to dig and figure out, well, what is really happening here? And that excites me.
But how many people are lazy though?
Everybody.
Exactly.
So have you seen what Khan Academy is doing with incorporating AI into their learning modules? It's essentially
I
trying
saw a
to
headline,
teach
but not
children
the details.
to ask. You should go check it out. It's fascinating. They've got some amazing demos. So it's this idea that you are essentially helping kids to ask deeper questions, to prompt, have a tutor on hand. And the tutor isn't necessarily, the AI tutor isn't necessarily giving you answers. It's asking you provocative questions to say, well, why would that be the case? Can you think about this a little more? Here's a prompt to help you think a little further down that rabbit hole. And that I think is fascinating. I think the kids, in the same way that the guys who won at search engine optimization were the guys that knew how to manipulate the Google engines. It was, I remember being pretty new in my very first internship, and I could Google anything. And they were like, how did you find that? I was like, well, it's how you ask it. And here we are with exactly the same thing. I mean, there's so many prompt packs out there. Some of them really useful, and the exponential view guys really deliver on that. But I think, as Renier rightly says, where's the soul of it? Where's the insight? Where's the thing that you've taken from that, not just regurgitated? And I think those BS barometers are going to get higher and higher, and we're going to gravitate towards the stuff that actually feeds our interest and I hate to say it, our souls.
Yeah, another thing that has rung out that Renier said on a previous episode is that AI has been commoditized already. So you mentioned Grammarly. It's like in all our project management tools, it's there. So what's differentiating? What's the next level of this? I think everyone's kind of caught up to the same place right now. Where to next? I know we've spoken many times about the opportunities that it can bring in health and et cetera, but I feel like we're hitting a ceiling because everyone's got their own little version of it on their app. So what's next? What's the next 6 months for AI?
Well, I'm happy to chat about Llama too, but Renier, I don't know if you have a thought on this before I delve into that.
Yeah, sure. No, I think we're scratching the surface in terms of how this actually integrates into the products. I mean, Notion adding AI writing tool, cool, that's great. But surely, we almost have to reimagine this interface and go, this thing doesn't. I mean, should Notion even look the way it does if we use AI properly? So that's on the writing side and the tooling side specifically. One of the very interesting applications that I came across recently is I was chatting to a medical doctor, and we were chatting about is an experienced GP better than a young GP? And they said, no, a young GP is way better. I'm like, well, how can it be? They go, well, the people that are up to 7 years out of varsity, they can still remember everything they've learned. Someone that's been out of varsity for 30 years, GP, they might have dealt with a lot of similar stuff. So sometimes they lose some of that knowledge, and I'm generalizing a bit, but I mean, I can imagine that happens because doctors generally learn so much during that 7-year period. You can imagine 30 years on, you forget that. So there's this project, and I think Google is involved with it, where they provide an assistant to a doctor to help them actually recall all of the stuff they learned as they go along. Now I look at that and I go, cool, that makes a lot of practical sense. So I love these little use cases that are popping up that are really making the efficiency of people looking at a problem, right? A problem of how do you store all of this knowledge of 7 years and quickly reference it, right? And you're taking that problem and saying, let's put something in place there. So the next 6 months for AI, I'd love to see more of reimagining how we can solve problems we previously, reimagining solutions to problems we previously weren't able to solve using a completely new interface and a completely new way of doing things. And I think the Docker example is a great one.
Like Da Vinci's helicopter, right? We now have the technology to actually build a helicopter, whereas
Yes.
you could imagine it before, but it wasn't possible. I think there's so much happening in the space. So we're all obviously familiar with OpenAI and ChatGPT, etc. Every single time that you loaded data into that system, you were essentially giving them more data to train on. But now with Meta's open source Llama 2, which is available through like Microsoft and through AWS, through Bedrock and SageMaker, you've got pre-trained models on like managed services that it essentially allows you to rapid prototype without having a whole team of data scientists and developers around. And I think this, like the ability to rapid prototype and get to a go, no-go decision as to whether this solution you're building actually solves a problem. Obviously, starting with why and working backwards and what's the problem you're trying to solve. I think we haven't even scratched the surface. There's so much coming out. I'm really excited because I think it's also far lower cost, much easier to prototype, much easier to kind of say, well, yep, we've solved this, or we haven't, or at least we've solved one or two requirements. We know there's possibility here. That's what I'm like. I mean, we're solutioneers at heart, so that makes me really, really excited. I think they're also, I don't know, I think we're going to start seeing the landscape shift as to who adopts that innovation sooner rather than later. We'd be surprised by how archaic some of the institutions still are, like the organizations out there. I mean, some people are just trying to automate their data, like reporting at this point. So, yeah, we'll see. I'm very excited. I think there's a lot down the pipeline that we don't even know yet.
Renier, there was a comment in the WhatsApp group about Bard's quality going down. Just want to tie that up quickly.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Initially, I found it quite cool as an internet research tool. Like, instead of using search, you use Bard to navigate. But it's just lying more than ever. Like, it's become completely unusable. And I think... I don't know if it's the feedback loop that's broken. Like some of the training data they're pushing back into it is not doing its job well. But I think that's sometimes it's very interesting because these models, get themselves in a place where they try and tell you what they think you want to hear instead of understanding what is truth and what is fiction. So, and GPT does it as well. Like you go, cool, he's giving me an answer because he believes the right thing to do is giving me something I want to hear instead of giving me a fact. So they have a bit of trouble sorting that out. But Bard has become particularly bad. I don't know, Catherine, do you use Bard? Have you used it? What is your experience?
Yeah, I use a couple of tools. I've moved off Open API. I, for example, use Cognosis and also God Mode. So some very fun tools to play with if you want to build out your own agents. I'm aware that Google has banned their own developers from using Bard. We often get asked whether we use Copilot. The reason we don't use it yet, which is surprising, right? Because we build AI-powered tools. But the reason we don't use it is we don't really know where the legality sits. If we're building out a system for Pick and Pay, and our developers are using Copilot, who actually owns that IP, right? Our service is to Pick and Pay. We build IP for them or code, we'd hand it over. But we don't want to land up in disputes until those legalities have really been solved. Doesn't mean that we don't use tools like Cognosis, for example, or MIT's Ideator to use it as a think tank, right? I think it's really great to climb out of your own echo chamber and have access to so many more links and resources and ideas and thoughts. You're not just sitting here with your own thoughts. But I saw that same study of the quality going down. I think it is going to plateau, and then we're probably going to reach the next level and the next evolution of that. More so, I think people are going to start realizing that like using it as just as a search term is not really the route to go. We're currently building we built out a production version of it, but we're building a new prototype of a tool called Linda, which essentially taps directly into your data warehouse as a company and gives you answers in real time. So you can ask for what my KPI sales year to date, or what my milk sales for Constantia for this store in the last week, depending on your access levels. But you're using that reasoning engine and that large language model to build up actual SQL queries that essentially gives you real-time data.
Amazing.
And that is interesting because you're not using GPT, you're using a large language model to infer intent.
I think that's the future for me, right there.
Actual.
That's great for meetings, Bobby. You don't have to do any prep. Just ask it on the side. You're not allowed to not have an answer to a question. You just go on the side. Yeah, of course. Let me just get what you're asking, and then.
I did a panel at Arctic 15 in May that's up in Helsinki, and I used Cognosis. So I basically inputted what the panel topic was. I inputted who the speakers were, and I was doing it as an experiment. And I told them I did this, and I asked it to give me a couple of things. I basically said, I want to know more about the panelists, and I want to know what questions pertaining to this topic I should be asking them. Not only did it come back with a bio on each, particular topics referencing article comments they've made in articles before, it also gave me an entire social media plan for how to promote the panel, not my panel computer, but the conference's panel, venues where I could have hosted it, other speakers we could have referenced. I mean, it just went on, the list went on. It even gave me a survey that I could give to the panelists and to the audience after the fact. It wrote me a press release. Like, it did all these things, and I was like, cool. But I ended up taking all of that and then figuring out which of it was true, which wasn't, what could I use. Like, I discovered someone's in the panel particularly interested in diversity, so I could bring that conversation in. It was fascinating, although I must have only used about 10% of it, and then it was a cool story to reference. But, I think that's going to make us
it's a great ideation tool, right? And that's what I love about it. Like, it's so good with triggering ideas and thoughts and putting one on a journey to go, maybe I should do a press release. So you don't end up using their press release, but you write your own one, and something you might have not thought about when you were putting it together, as an example. So I love that it does that, and I can see it playing a bigger role for us going forward and doing stuff like that.
I love that it will book my travel for me, and I don't have to figure out the shortest route to the nearest hotel. That's amazing. Just go back to Lückhoff. We should help them build an agent like that.
I say, like a holiday. Running out of time. I am like, it's bugging me now. Llama 2, open source. Please tell us what it is before we close the show.
Well, it's essentially Meta's answer to ChatGPT, or GPT-4. So it is a large language model. What they've done that's very different is OpenAI make their model, it's closed, you essentially pay to use it, pretty expensive to build some of the agents and tools you want on top of that because you pay per API call. Llama, what Meta's done is actually made it available completely open source. They've been very smart though. So anything under 700 million active users a month, free of charge, but they've essentially knocked out their competition, by saying, if you're over 700 million users, you have to start paying licensing fees. And they've made those licensing fees that, for example, Amazon and Microsoft are now pulling those models into their tools like Bedrock. The cost is for the large tech company, not for the end user. So fascinating. They might obviously adapt their billing models accordingly. But yeah, essentially you have a pre-trained model at your disposal and you can start innovating off the back of that. If you're a bit more technical, you can use something like SageMaker, but Bedrock works perfectly well for foundation models. And just with a little bit of thinking and what's the right tool for the job, you can start saying, well, let's build out prototypes like we're doing now with Linda, for example. So I'm really excited. I think it opens it up for every company to use and not pay an arm and a leg to try and figure out what rapid prototyping and innovation looks like.
Crazy. Renier, final thoughts on that?
Meta would make it open source.
Yeah.
No, I think it's quite strategic to make it open source. Because once you do that, you actually move the battle to a different front. And I love that we're seeing more of that in big tech. Not necessarily too fond of the idea of Meta winning, but anyway, we'll leave that discussion for another day. but yeah, definitely exciting space, and excited to see what's going to come out of it in the next few months.
Brilliant.
Okay, I'm curious. You asked a question as to whether we think AI is a good thing or not. What are your take? What is your take on that?
Oh, put me on the spot, eh? also agree with you. I see how we cannot, how can we not use it, right? The fear I have is the gap, right? They talk about the K, the people that are, like just listening to you guys talk about it, I can feel like I've got to go and learn more. I feel like that gap is going. People are not paying attention to it. They're not understanding how to use it, what its benefits are, and that's one of my fears. I agree with what Renier said as well, like going back to the theater, those kind of things. So it definitely has its place, but I don't want to lose that human side of it. That's why I ask questions about how do we see through the bullshit that people are just prompting and, acting clever when they don't actually know what they're reading. So those are my fears, but I can't, I mean, like productivity, I'm like busy 12 hours a day, every day. All of a sudden I can just quickly do a prompt and, I've done something in like a fraction of the time. How can you not try and understand what else it can do for you? So, there's definitely a space for it, and I just want to hope that it gets democratized, that everybody gets the right or the same exposure, so that we can all learn together instead of leaving people behind, because we're already marginalized society as it is. Mic drop.
Yeah.
All right. Enough of that. All right. So, hey, what's that, Renier?
You have to actually drop the mic, so just knock it over there in front of you.
And bye, everyone. All right. Well, Catherine, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation. Honestly, I feel like I could just sit and absorb a lot more. So hopefully we'll have you back on and hear where AI's gone and what else 2050 are up to. And thank you for joining. It was great having you on.
Such a pleasure chatting to you guys. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Cool.
I've got some newsletter links to send you back.
Yes.
Looking forward to it. All right, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Renier.